What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. We'd also like to give a special shout out to one of Not Your Average Meta's generous patrons, Martin Stanley, for everything he's done to help out the channel. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we're bringing you our second to last game of the season, featuring a face-off for the Season 4 title of Most Wins on the channel. This week's matchup features Martin competing for the title of Most Wins playing General Ferrous Rokiric, Patrick returning this week playing Ayula Queen Among Bears, Foggraw also competing for the title of Most Wins on the channel playing his new Rule 0 commander Witch-Maw Nephilim, and Foil running it back with his Mishra Tamer of Mak Fawa deck. Now that we have our fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Fog plays a Spire of Industry before paying 1 to cast a Civic Saber. Foil plays a tapped Tomb Fortress for turn while Martin plays a Mountain. Patrick plays a Snow-Covered Forest for turn and passes to Fog, who plays the Plains. Fog then loses 1 life and pays to cast Mnemonic Sphere. Foil plays a Mountain for turn and then pays 2 for a Tormenting Voice, which has him discarding a card in order to draw 2 more cards. Martin plays the Plains for turn before paying 2 in order to cast a Boreal Skilled Mage. Patrick plays another Snow-Covered Forest for turn and then pays 2 to cast his commander, Ayula. Fog plays a Swamp for turn and then pays 3, losing a life in order to cast damage to the new Benalia's Light. Foil plays another Mountain for turn and then pays 3 in order to cast Slowbad, Iron Goblin. Martin plays a Sunbaked Canyon for turn before going to combat, deciding to swing his Guild Mage over Patrick for 1 damage. Second main phase, Martin taps out, losing a life in order to cast General Ferrous from the command zone. Patrick plays another Snow-Covered Forest for turn before paying 2 to cast a Runeclaw Bear, which puts 2 +1/+1 counters on his commander. He then pays an additional 1 to cast a Commander's Plate and passes. Fog draws for turn and then pays 2, losing a life to crack his Sphere in order to draw 2 more cards. He then plays a second Plains for turn before casting the Alicid of Life's Bounty. He finally then pays to equip his Saber to Daneth and passes. Foil draws for turn, but then just pays 3 to cast a Sword of Hearth and Home. Martin plays another Plains for turn before paying 2 to cast a True Fire Paladin, which triggers his commander, creating a 4/4 Golem token. He then pays an additional 2, losing a life in order to cast a Symbol of the Legion, which creates him another Golem token. Patrick plays another Snow-Covered Forest for turn before he then pays to equip his commander with his Commander's Plate. Fog draws for turn and then plays a Forest. This then finally gives him the right colored mana to pay 4, losing a life in order to cast his commander, Witch-Maw Nephilim. Foil draws for turn and then pays to equip Slowbad with his sword. He then goes to combat, swinging Slowbad over Patrick for 6 damage. This then triggers a sword, which has him choosing not to exile any of his creatures, but then has him going into his library to get a land to put into play. He then uses the land in order to cast a Knight's Whisper, which has him losing 2 life and drawing 2 cards. Martin draws for turn before paying 4 to cast a Falaji Vanguard, which triggers his commander, creating another Golem token. He then goes to combat, swinging 2 Golems over at Fog, while he then swings the rest of his available creatures over at Foil. Fog then declares his commander as a blocker, but before damage is dealt, he pays 1 to cast a Loren's Escape. This then makes his commander indestructible and he scries 1 card, keeping it on top of his library. This also puts 2 counters on his commander before him and Foil both take the rest of their damage. Patrick plays another Snow-Covered Forest for turn before casting Ayula's Influence and discarding a land in order to create a bear token. The bear then enters play and puts 2 more counters on his commander. Patrick then goes to combat, swinging his commander over Martin for 9 commander damage. Fog draws for turn and then pays to equip his commander with the Civic Saber. He then pays 4 and casts a Tanuki Transplanter, which has him putting 2 more counters onto his commander. Foil draws and then casts a Pirate's Pillage, which has him discarding a card in order to create 2 treasure tokens and then draw 2 more cards. He then pays an additional 1 to cast a Faithless Looting, which has him drawing 2 cards and then discarding 2 more cards. Foil then plays a Swamp for turn and then goes to combat, this time swinging Slowbad over at Fog, who just takes the damage. This then has him choosing not to exile his creature once again before going into his library to get another land to put into play. He then pays 2 for an Oni Cult Anvil and passes. Martin draws for turn and then goes to combat, swinging 1 of his Golems over at Fog, 2 of his Golems over at Patrick, and his other 3 creatures over at Foil. Patrick blocks both the creatures coming at him with his 2 bears, while Fog and Foil both decide to just take their damage. Martin then casts a Boros Reckoner, creating himself another Golem token, and he passes his turn. Patrick draws Return and then casts In Search of Greatness, as well as casting a pair of Swiftfoot boots. Fogg draws Return and then casts a Veteran Explorer, which puts 2 more counters onto his commander. He then pays an additional 3 to reconfigure his Transplanter onto his commander. Fogg then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at foil, promising he's going to help the table out. This then creates Fogg 11 green mana. He then uses 3 of the green mana in order to cast a Beast Within to destroy the commander's plate, giving Patrick a 3/3 beast token. He then uses his Spire of Industry to create a blue mana, losing a life in order to cast a Reality Shift to exile Ayula. Patrick then manifests the top card of his library where Fogg casts a pair of Swiftfoot boots and puts more counters onto his commander. Finally, Fogg pays to equip his commander with the Swiftfoot boots while also paying to unequip his Transplanter from his commander. Foil plays the Swamp for turn before he then pays in order to cast his commander from the command zone. Foil then pays 3 using Mishra's ability to unearth his Phyrexian Fleshgorger from his graveyard. He then makes a deal with Fogg, swinging the Fleshgorger over at him while he swings Slowbat over at Patrick. Fogg then double blocks with his Alicet of Life's Bounty and his Veteran Explorer, while Patrick blocks with his Manifest token. Fogg gains a life. Each player then goes into their library to get 2 basic lands to put into play since the Veteran Explorer got sent to the graveyard. Foil then uses his Anvil to sacrifice a Fleshgorger, which has each player losing a life while he gains a life, before he then remembers to gain the life from his Fleshgorger's lifelink. On his end step, Martin casts a Boros Charm, dealing 4 damage to Fogg, which then has him creating another 4/4 Golem token. Martin then untaps Return and Draw before going to combat. This then has him swinging 2 of his Golems over at Patrick while he swings 3 Golems over at Fogg. Patrick then blocks 1 of the Golems but still takes 5 damage, and Fogg also blocks 2 of the Golems, gaining some life off of Danitha before he then takes his remaining damage. Second main, Martin casts a True Fire Captain, which has him creating another Golem token. On his upkeep, Patrick looks at the top card of his library before he then draws it. He then pays 4 and casts Ayula from his command zone a second time. He then pays an additional 2 to cast a Mother Bear, which has him once again putting 2 counters on his commander. On his end step, Fogg casts a Growth Spiral, which has him drawing a card and then putting an Evolving Wilds into play from his hand. Fogg draws Return and then he cracks the Evolving Wilds in order to go into his library and get a land to put into play tapped. He then casts the Finest Hour, which has him putting 2 more counters on his commander before he goes to combat. He then swings his commander over at Martin, who blocks with all of his available creatures. This then has Martin shooting Fogg in the face for 6 damage, while Fogg still has 6 commander damage trample over. Fogg then untaps his commander before going to combat, once again attacking Martin, taking him out of the game with commander damage. Foil draws Return and then casts an Unmarked Grave, which has him going into his library to get a card to put into his graveyard. He then pays to use Mishra's ability to unearth his Wormcoil Engine from his graveyard. Foil then goes to combat, swinging Mishra over at Patrick for 6 commander damage, while he swings the Wormcoil Engine as token over at Fogg for 7, taking him out of the game. Foil then triggers his sword, which has him exiling the Wormcoil Engine before he goes into his library to get a land to put into play. The Wormcoil Engine then comes back into play, and Foil pays in order to equip the worm with the Sword of Hearth and Home. He finally casts a Cranial Plating and passes turn. On his upkeep, Patrick looks at the top card of his library before choosing to scry to the bottom. He then draws Return and plays another snow-covered forest. He then casts a Birthing Burrows. He then pays to use its ability in order to create a 2/2 Shapeshifter token, which puts 2 counters on his commander when it enters play. Foil plays a tapped Bloodfell Chaos Return, gaining a life. He then pays 3 to flashback his Faithless Looting, which has him drawing 2 more cards before he then discards 2 cards. He then pays to use Mishra's ability in order to unearth his Meteor Golem from his graveyard, bring it into play, destroying the Shapeshifter token. Foil then pays to equip the Cranial Plate into his Wormcoil Engine before going to combat, swinging him over at Patrick, who just takes the 14 damage. Foil then gains 14 life and uses the Sword's ability to exile his Meteor Golem before going into his library to go get another land to put into play. The Meteor Golem then returns to play, blowing up the Birthing Burrows, and Foil passes turn. On his upkeep, Patrick looks at the top card of his library before he then draws it and casts it in order to destroy the Sword of Hearth and Home. He then also pays to cast an Endurance, targeting Foil's graveyard, having him shuffle it back into his library. He then equips his commander with his Swiftfoot boots and passes. Foil draws Return and then casts a Sneak Attack. He then pays to sneak in a Yara Widow of the Realm. He then uses a Yara's ability to sacrifice a meteor golem, which has him dealing exactly 7 damage to Patrick's face, winning him the game. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.